Today we're going to wrap up, at least for the time being, our discussion of long-run macro issues. We will return to these issues after we discuss shorter-run problems related to recessions, financial crises, and other economic fluctuations. But for now, I'd like you to bring together what you have learned so far to address several crucial economic policy issues. This long-run focus tends to emphasize the so-called supply-side economic policies. In contrast, shorter-run issues lead to more focus on the demand-side policies. In truth, as you know, it's hard, both economically and politically, to separate these two sides, and this gives rise to heated debate among policymakers and economists. To help dramatize these long-run issues and also have a little fun, we're going to use a Mission Impossible format, and we're going to start with Mission Impossible 1. I'll be right back, but it is important that you watch and listen carefully to the following video. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to uncover the reasons for the massive shift in consumption, investment, net exports, and government purchases as a share of GDP in the United States of America in the 1990s, a time of general peace and prosperity for the U.S. economy. You will now see 4 charts showing these tectonic shifts. In the upper left, you'll see consumption as a share of GDP during the 1990s. You can see its upward trend. The arrow helps you see that. During this period of time, consumption rose by 2% of GDP. In the upper right is investment as a share of GDP. You see a similar upward trend. You can see that trend better with this arrow. Over this span of time, you'll notice that investment as a share of GDP rose by 5%. In the lower left, you see net exports as a share of GDP. It's generally going down during the 1990s. Draw an arrow to help illustrate that, and you can see the net exports actually fell by 4% of GDP. And in the lower right, finally, we look at government purchases as a share of GDP. During this span of time, they were generally declining. Draw an arrow during this period, and you can see that decline, and measure it's about minus 3% of GDP. Government purchases falling by 3% of GDP. So there have been these changes in the spending shares of GDP during the 1990s in the United States of America. You will need a special device to carry out this mission. So we've decided to give you one of the most powerful economic devices ever made. It's called the Spending Allocation Model, or SAM. Thanks to our intense training program and your hard work, you are now an expert in operating this amazing device with the utmost precision. Remember, your SAM is your friend. You will need to consider 3 key facts to carry out the mission. Number 1, most of the reduction in government purchases in the 1990s was due to defense cutbacks related to the end of the Cold War. Number 2, real interest rates generally declined during the 1990s. Number 3, the U.S. economy was operating close to its potential in most of the 1990s. And as you know, that means real GDP was nearly equal to potential GDP during those years. You need to consider these facts as you carry out your mission to explain these trends in the shares of GDP. Now, let me come in at this point. I think you see the instructions that are associated with Mission Impossible 1, but I have a few suggestions as you think about this. As with most macro problems that we've considered, it's likely that there's going to be different explanations for this. Different explanations are going to emerge as you get together with your team. People on each team, and in fact teams, may have different answers to this question, to this explanation of why the shares of spending did what they did. A good answer, an answer that's going to be helpful, is one that is carefully reasoned using SAM, using that model, is consistent with the facts, in particular the 3 facts listed, the 3 things that must be satisfied to make this work. And it's got to be simple enough so we can draw lessons for the future. For example, from this, what can we learn about changes in government purchases and consumption in the next decade ahead, or the decade after that? The input from the team members in the discussion, of course, is going to help us understand this, get a better team answer. So that's why it's important to give your answers as in the instructions in the video. You got to make sure you have discussion, maybe criticize some things you disagree with, and that way we'll get to a better answer from the team. Now, having said this, let's get on to Mission Impossible 2 and 3, where the same type of teamwork concepts will apply. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find 5 good ways to increase long-term economic growth in the United States of America by 1% per year. You'll now see a chart with more specifics about your mission. This chart shows real GDP and potential GDP and forecasts of real GDP. The blue line up until the vertical line represents what's actually happened to real GDP in the United States during this period from 2000 to the present. The blue line after that vertical line represents the forecast of the Congressional Budget Office, their forecast of the next few years. The red line is potential GDP. That's what the economy is capable of based on the capital available and the labor force and the things that generate long-term growth like productivity. And then you'll see the future. There's a projection of the potential GDP long into the future, after 2023. It says 2.3% growth. That's the CBO's guess, projection of what potential is going to be into the future. So your mission is to get that 2.3% up to 3.3%. That's that 1% increase. And you can see how much that would generate in terms of trillions of dollars. Remember, all of these lines are measured with trillions of dollars on the vertical axis in real terms, 2005 dollars. And so you could generate an enormous amount of extra production by getting this growth rate up, which seems like a small amount from 2.3% to 3.3%, but would be tremendously valuable in terms of the future. That's the mission. You'll need a special device to carry out this mission. So we've decided to give you another one of the most powerful economic devices ever made. It's called the Growth Accounting Formula. Thanks to our intense training program and your hard work, we are now seeing you are an expert in operating this amazing device with utmost precision. Remember, your Growth Accounting Formula is your friend. You also need to consider some facts to carry out your mission. One fact is that potential GDP growth is equal to the sum of productivity growth plus the growth of hours of work. You've got to take this into account, this fact into account, when you go about your mission. The CBO projects potential GDP growth for the years from 2016 to 2023 to be 2.3% per year. You could see that in the previous graph. They think of that 2.3% per year as due to 1.6% per year productivity growth and 0.7% per year growth of hours of work. So to increase that 2.3%, you got to think about the 1.6 going higher and or the 0.7% per year going higher. Thus, you might find policies to raise growth from 2.3% per year to 3.3% per year using the Growth Accounting Formula and using these facts. Now, let me come back and add a few thoughts about Mission Impossible 2, as you've seen in that little video. As with MI1, there are several possible acceptable answers to MI2. So you need to be aware of putting your ideas out there and debating them as you work on this in your separate teams. Also, that 1% goal is kind of more of an example here, more of an illustration, kind of more in keeping with Mission Impossible 2, the concept. In fact, though, the policies you suggest, the main thing is that they have a positive effect on long-term growth. You can't really estimate exactly what the size would be, obtaining the numerical size of the effect. I mean, that's for later missions or later economics courses that you take. For now, the idea is to recognize that a certain policy will raise growth. That's what you want to do, and certainly not lower it. Of course, IMF teamwork for MI2 proceeds much as with MI1. All the same ideas are there in terms of working with your team, getting a team recommendation, and submitting the results to the mission commander, who will then make the final decisions. So that's how it's going to go. So now let's get on to find out about MI3. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to determine the rate of money growth to support your new 3.3% long-term growth rate for the years starting in 2016. Of course, you'll need a special device to carry out this mission, just like the other missions. And we have decided to give you yet another one of the most powerful economic devices ever made. It's called the quantity equation of money. Thanks to our intense training program and your hard work, you are now an expert in operating this amazing device with the utmost precision. Remember, your quantity equation is your friend. You also need to consider 3 key facts to carry out this mission. The first fact is the Federal Reserve, the Fed's target for inflation, is 2% per year. They want to have the inflation rate equal to about 2% per year into the future. Second, the velocity of money, at least measured with respect to the M2 measure, has been declining recently. Velocity has been declining. In fact, its growth rate has been negative 1% per year recently. The third fact is to keep in mind that the growth rate of a product of 2 terms is approximately the sum of the growth rates of each term. That's going to be an important fact to take into account when you find out and discover the appropriate rate of money growth. In particular, if you have 2 variables, x and y, then the growth rate of the product of x times y is going to equal the growth rate of x plus the growth rate of y, at least approximately. There you have it. Good luck.